The majority of farmers on our planet have 5 acres or less. And people say, they're not viable. You've got to get rid of them. Get big or get out. The Kaisers have shown, Singing Frog Farm's shown, all of them can be viable. It's not rocket science. We don't have to invent anything new. These systems that we talk about exist. What we need to do is just scale up this best practice. And that's just education and training. We're not talking about spending billions of dollars on all these carbon dioxide removal factories that have failed. Give us a few million and we could turn it around and be net zero within a few years.
That's André Leu. He's an Australian farmer, he's a scientist, he's founder and international director of Regeneration International, and we'll be talking to him on today's podcast. You're listening to Down to Earth, the Planet to Plate podcast, a co-production of Radio Cafe and Quivira Coalition. I'm your host, Mary Charlotte Domandi. We will be right back with André after these announcements. Quivira's fall field season is kicking off this month with offerings in person in New Mexico, Texas, Colorado, and over the web. Topics include mental health and stress management for food producers, soil health on rangelands, virtual fencing, and land art. And of course, the Regenerate Conference is happening in Denver in November. Check out the schedule at quiviracoalition.org/events and get yourself registered soon. You can also go to regenerateconference.com. High Country News is a nonprofit, reader-supported publication that has been covering the West's land and communities for more than 50 years. Go to hcn.org/trial to get 2 print issues and 60 days of digital access to all of HCN's reporting for free. That's hcn.org/trial. Are you a rangeland producer looking to increase the productivity of your land and improve soil health? Consider applying to Quivira's Soil to Supper program. Soil to Supper funds will help producers to get more meat and other livestock products into regional supply chains while increasing soil health, reducing waste, and building climate resilience. Producers of livestock products based in the southern half of Colorado, eastern Arizona, western Texas, or any part of New Mexico who are interested in participating in Soil to Supper can apply by October 1st, 2024. More information at soiltosupper.org. And now to our program. I'm really happy to welcome back to the program André Leu. He's co-founder and international director of Regeneration International, an organization that promotes food, farming, and land use systems that regenerate and stabilize the climate. He's author of several books, including Myths of Safe Pesticides and Poisoning Our Children, and he's co-author with Dr. Vandana Shiva of Biodiversity, Agroecology, and Regenerative Agriculture. He has a doctorate of science in agriculture and environmental systems and teaches at universities and speaks at numerous conferences as well as United Nations events. His new book is The Regenerative Agriculture Solution, a revolutionary approach to building soil, creating climate resilience, and supporting human and planetary health, published by Chelsea Green Press. And at the end of the show, we'll tell you how you can get 35% off on this book. On top of all that, he's a farmer. He's been farming at his home in Australia for over 50 years. Welcome, André, to Down to Earth.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
Great to have you back on the show. So this new book, The Regenerative Agriculture Solution, which is co-written with Ronnie Cummins, who very sadly died about a year ago before he finished the book, the two of you had worked together for a long time on Regeneration International. Was this book intended as a collaboration to begin with, or did you pick up where he left off, or what was that process?
It was going to be his book, but I was actively collaborating with him on the actual content of the book. I'm the person who he was basically sounding out. I was the one who was supplying him with a lot of the information. So when he passed away, he'd only written 2 draft chapters and there was an outline, but Rose, his widow, and also the editor at Chelsea Green at the time then asked me if I would finish it off. And I knew that's what Ronnie would really want me to do. So of course that's what I did.
So when he passed away, Ronnie was writing about, and the first chapter of the book is about some very exciting work going on in central Mexico, where he lived at a farm called Via Organica, which is, the work specifically was this relatively simple, low-tech innovation that he learned at a place called Hacienda Zamarripa, where these guys named the Flores brothers invented this technique. And that involved basically the agave plant. Tell us about this whole project. What are they doing with the agave and with livestock in Mexico?
This is actually an incredible breakthrough, and also a breakthrough in how we, to say, redesign agroecosystems and we regenerate landscapes. So the agave and the other plant in this system is the mesquite tree. They are main parts of the native vegetation through New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, and then the high desert of Mexico. And these are dominant plant species. Now, they've had sort of minor roles in agriculture in the area. The agaves, for instance, are mainly used for making mezcal.
Right.
And the mesquite was sort of used as like a drought food or famine food. You could eat the pods, but they weren't seen as commercially viable. When they used the agave plant for mezcal, they cut the big leaves off it, and they just have the heart of the plant. Essentially, it's a sugary sap that they ferment to make mezcal, but they throw away the rest of it. What the Flores brothers worked out is by chopping it up and then fermenting it, the same way farmers make silage. What that does is that breaks down the saponins and other compounds that plants make to protect themselves from being eaten. Plants, believe it or not, don't like to be eaten, and they put out a whole range of compounds that are toxic to animals. So where this is a breakthrough, what was regarded as inedible for animals now becomes this really digestible, very valuable stock feed, a silage. The other part of it is it's just low in protein. The mesquite is a legume. It's really high in protein. It's the same issue. It's got tannins and lectins and saponins and also nasty big spikes to protect itself from being eaten. And by finally chopping that up and fermenting it, it does the same thing. So by combining them together now, there's this incredibly high protein, high calorie, digestible food from the native ecosystem. And what is happening now in these systems, instead of clearing it for grazing or clearing it for corn, just basically clearing all the biodiversity out and just growing a monoculture, now we can start putting the native biodiversity back into the system and sustainably regenerate the system. We can put more animals out there now because we can run the animals, they can eat the grass and everything in between the trees. And then in the dry season, the drought season, that's the time when before the animals would degrade the system. And most of our grazing lands are turning into desert because of degenerative grazing practices. What we can do now is take the animals off that pasture, rest it, and feed them on this silage, keep them really healthy. So for the animals would also lose condition. It's cruel on the animals, cruel on the landscape. Now, the animals we can keep really healthy, and it's a win-win. And in this system, the farmers now can produce more animals, and it's wonderful organic meat.
One of the things that is so interesting about it is that, first of all, a lot of different animals like this. It's not just cattle. It's like cattle, goats, chickens. What kind of animals are eating this stuff?
Every animal you can imagine. Whatever animal, rabbits, chickens.
Have you tried it?
Yeah, actually, it's sort of like a sauerkraut, best way to say it. We do the same, with sauerkraut, kimchi. We have fermented foods since the beginning of time because fermenting foods makes them more digestible. In this case, we're taking something that's inedible and we're making it highly edible. It's a game changer.
And it's a game changer for a number of reasons. And one is that these animals that are eating this are really healthy and happy. They like the food and it's very nourishing for them. Another is that the native ecosystems get to regrow and be healthy and get restored. And another is that you can actually have more animals so that it becomes profitable.
Yeah, that's exactly right. These are areas with some of the poorest people on the planet. And it's where we get what we call the farming diaspora. They're walking off their farms. On the other side of the equation, we've got the migration crisis. Most people don't want to actually leave their villages and their towns and where they grew up, their culture. They want to stay there. But putting in these systems, we're giving these people a really good quality of life. And it's not just Mexico. We actually have 500 million farming families around the world in these semi-arid grazing lands. And they're all degraded. We're seeing the same issues of migration at the moment because people cannot make a good living. Every single one of these ecosystems on every continent has their equivalent of the mesquite, which is the legume tree. We can work with the native ones. Agaves have been naturalized on all continents. So we're not bringing in a weed problem. It's already there. We can essentially regenerate the ecosystem that they have now, bring back more biodiversity, keep the people where they want to be, give them a really good standard of living. This is the other side of it. We're not just regenerating landscapes and ecosystems. We are regenerating communities, which is equally as important.
Right. One of the things that I wanted to ask you was this agave silage that you're talking about is mostly water, and that water goes to the livestock. So that's very important in places where there aren't wells or there isn't sufficient water otherwise. And this is a climate that has very little rainfall. Where does the water come from that makes these agaves so liquid?
Such a good question. I'm really glad you asked that because I think this is one of the really incredible things about agaves. They don't need rain. They can take the humidity out of the atmosphere and use it. Even in the driest deserts, there is some humidity. So this is actually one of the miracles of the plants. They have a special photosynthesis system that allows them to do this and not get dehydrated like other plants do, and use that humidity and collect it in the leaves. And you're right, once we ferment it, that water is there and that is fully available to the animals.
And the mesquite trees are fixing nitrogen in the soil.
Yeah.
Over time, how is the soil doing? Is it fixing nitrogen? Is it sequestering carbon?
This is actually the important thing, is both the mesquite and the agave sequester carbon. Mesquites are very long-lived. They're slow-growing, but once they get their taproots down, and their taproots will go down yards and yards deep to get the water or the moisture in the soil. So they're really hardy in droughts. And while they're doing that, they're actually photosynthesizing. They're taking the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. They combine that with the water. And through photosynthesis, they make glucose. And as they grow, about 30% of all those carbon compounds, those glucose compounds, get shed by the mesquite trees into the soil. You've got one group of organisms called rhizobium, and in exchange for that glucose, they then fix the nitrogen in the soil. And it's not just the nitrogen from mesquite, it actually gives the nitrogen for all these other plants, including the agaves, so the companion plants. They're getting all that. So the mesquite now is just building up the soil microbiome and feeding all the other organisms. The agave is doing the same as well. So what we're doing is building up the soil, but really importantly here, we are removing carbon dioxide, the main greenhouse gas. And we know that an acre of agaves in our system removes 8,000 pounds of carbon dioxide per year, every year.
And does it keep on doing that? Or does the soil get maxed out at a certain point? How does that work?
No, it doesn't. It goes deeper. If you just test the first few inches, it reaches its preferred level. But all the work we've got, when you start going down 3 feet, 4 feet, that's when you see the carbon accumulating. So the fact is we can do it indefinitely. And if you look at the amount of emissions at the moment, the actual increase in CO2, that's going up by 28 gigatons a year. That's 28 billion tons. Now, with the agave system, if we were to scale that up across all the arid, semi-arid lands on the planet, we would remove all of that. In other words, we would hit net zero straight away just doing that.
I mean, that's almost inconceivable that one system like that could work. I mean, everybody says there's no silver bullets. It's sort of like you're offering a silver bullet.
Actually, I just want to say we're being very conservative. We're just talking about the leaves of the agave. We're still doing the work to look at what the mesquite does and then the grasses. In the book, I give lots of other examples of how we can do it. So it's not just a silver bullet or one size fits all. We have lots and lots of ways of these regenerative systems that draw down carbon dioxide, that remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and we can apply them. It doesn't matter where you are. You know, you can be in New England, the northeast of the States. You can be in California. You can be in the Amazon. You can be in Europe. You can be in the Mediterranean climate. We have the science. We have the evidence. We just need to scale it up. And we don't have to scale up 100% with these really good systems. If we could just change 10% of the arid areas to the agave system, and then if we start looking at some of the pasture cropping systems, holistic planned grazing systems, just to name some, then there's some really good organic agroecological systems that growing lots of crops in mulch and compost. One of the best examples for people should Google Singing Frogs Farm in California.
I had them on the air. It was one of the first shows I ever did on regenerative agriculture, like about 10 years ago. And they're doing incredible work, getting many harvests a year and feeding the soil even while they're growing crops.
Yeah. And, you know, they've got 3 acres.
Yeah, on 3 acres.
And it's one of the most productive farms on the planet. You know, the amount of income they get, the people they employ, you know, you think about the benefits from this. But what's really important here is that the majority of farmers on our planet have 5 acres or less. And people say, oh, you know, they're not viable. You've got to get rid of them. Get big or get out. The Kaisers have shown, Singing Frog Farm has shown, all of them can be viable. It's not rocket science. We don't have to invent anything new. These systems that we talk about exist. What we need to do is just scale up this best practice, and that's just education and training. We're not talking about spending billions of dollars on all these carbon dioxide removal factories that have failed. Give us a few million, and we could turn it around and be net zero within a few years.
So going back to the agave example in Mexico, and it doesn't have to be just Mexico, but that's where this whole process was invented or discovered. And there's a couple of farms doing very successful livestock farming with fermented agave as their feed 3/4 of the year or most of the year. What would it take to actually get that implemented on a large scale? I mean, as you say, scaling up is the key. What does it take for that to, I don't know what the word is, go viral or be adopted?
One of the things that Ronnie started right in the beginning of this was the Billion Agave project, and we're working on that to get it scaled up. It's just so difficult for us to get funding to scale it up. We have the farmers who want to do it. We have the technology. Everything is there. We just need the funding. And that is the really hard thing for us. In this field, there are hundreds of billions of dollars floating around at the moment. And it's doing nothing. Everything's getting worse. And then on top of that, we've got the ESG funds where there's trillions. And if we look at what's happening on our planet, every indicator shows that things are getting worse. We can talk about all the fires around the world, and at the same time, we can talk about all the devastating floods. This will only get worse until we start regenerating ecosystems and removing the main greenhouse gas CO2. We need to redirect the hundreds of billions of dollars. We don't even have to do all of it. If we could just get $1 billion of it, less than 1% of what is being wasted, we would turn it around. We would have whole areas regenerated. We would have the climate back to the way it should be. And we could do it very quickly.
Well, let's say that, just in a perfect world where you had the public understanding, the political will, and the money to implement the restoration of grasslands, to do agave projects, to do agroforestry, to do pasture cropping, to do rotational grazing, all the things that fall under regenerative agriculture. Is the workforce there? Are there enough people to actually understand and do this work?
That's a good question, and the answer is yes. But that workforce is the current migration crisis we've got around the world, because they can't get work. They can't feed their families. They've got to leave where they grew up, where all their families, their culture, their relatives, to try and get better opportunities. In many cases, risk their lives, pay crime gangs to go through borders and so on. That workforce is there. We can turn it around. What we need to be doing is regenerating where they come from so that they can stay there, and pay them for their ecosystem services of regenerating. Most of these people would just love to stay back in their villages with their families, and we give them a good job and we pay them to regenerate our planet, to fix the climate, to fix the ecosystems. We can produce more healthy food so they have healthy diets, fix up their health problems. So many issues we could change by redirecting where our funding goes.
Has this agave thing spread at all within Mexico?
It's spreading slowly, not as fast as we would like it. This is Regeneration International. We've employed one person as our coordinator for the Billion Agave project. So we are scaling it up. We are slowly getting money in. But given the state of the planet, it's too slow.
And the key is sequestering carbon in the ground by doing regenerative practices.
Exactly. The last chapter on the book is about how Ronnie and I looked at how we want to scale it up, and that is particularly paying people for ecosystem services, of which one is removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. It's not carbon trading. We pay people for actual services of what we do. We pay a doctor for a service, or a dentist, or a plumber, or a mechanic for a service. In this case, we have landholders, traditional owners, First Nations people, farmers, ranchers, whole suite of people. They're doing the right regenerative practices. They are taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. They're fixing the problem. At the moment, we're taking that for granted. We don't pay them. And this is a whole shift. And we start doing that. We start getting land managers, farmers, ranchers, changing their practices from one where agriculture is one of the major contributors to climate change to where agriculture and land management becomes the major solution to climate change.
Now, are climate activists getting any better about making the connection between regenerative food systems and climate solutions?
No. Unfortunately, a lot of resistance. The current one for us is actually the rollout of renewables is doing the opposite of what we want. It's making no difference to emissions. We're actually going up now at 3% carbon dioxide per year. Paris, it was 2% per year in the decade leading up to Paris 2015. We are now 3%, means we are 50% worse. And it continues to get worse. And most of the renewable, that energy, where's it going? It's going into the service for the cloud, service for AI, and the services for cryptocurrency, the amount of electricity they're drawing. It's not making any contribution. On the other hand, now you can see the next battle that's happening. The amount of renewables we need to roll out in terms of solar panels and wind turbines is massive. So what we're seeing now is the industrialization of landscapes. Good farming land just being covered. Our hills full of wind turbines. We live in rural communities. We like nature. And suddenly our rural communities are now industrialized. The ground is covered. Everywhere you look, there's eyesores, and then big power lines go through our communities. And where it's happening, you can see the farmers are revolting. Some countries like Italy now has banned it, and that will happen. The other issue here is that when you cover the ground with solar panels, you're stopping photosynthesis. So you're actually stopping the removal of carbon dioxide. Even if we stopped emissions tomorrow, the carbon dioxide we've got in the atmosphere will take around 1,000 years to dissipate. It's got a half-life of 300 years,
right?
Which means we will continue to heat up. And this is what is not said. If we go to net zero, we still go into catastrophic climate change because that carbon dioxide is there. We have to actively remove it. And we can't wait for it to remove itself. We have to remove it now. And the tool that we've got to remove it is the best tool ever. It's called plants, plant leaves, the most efficient way we've got, the easiest way to scale up. And we know how to do it. Regenerate agroforestry systems, pasture cropping, grazing, holistic plant management. And we can take all that carbon dioxide out and start going negative.
One of the things that I think is disturbing is that, as you write, current climate models actually leave out the effect of soil organic matter and vegetation, and their effect on water cycles and weather systems and the cooling that comes from plant ecosystems. Are there any scientific bodies that are bringing this into climate models so that they can actually affect policy?
The answer, once again, is no. We have extensive science on it, but you look at all the models have been notoriously bad at predicting what's going to happen. You've got predictions like the Arctic was going to be ice-free in 2005 and all the glaciers are going to melt, and they've been proven wrong. On the other hand, the other predictions of what we've got now, like the extreme weather events, they've underpredicted it. So these models are very poor, and because you're talking about complex systems, it depends what you put in and what you leave out. And they've left out soil organic matter, and they've left out the effect of transpiration from plants. So at the moment, it's 1.5 degrees Celsius warm. That was supposed to be the Paris minimum. So that's say 2.7 Fahrenheit. We've crossed that already the last 2 years. What we know is by regenerating forest systems, for starters, the transpiration, we can cool it down. And there's a really good study looking at the USA, and particularly eastern USA. And there are parts of the east coast of the USA now that are 2 degrees cooler than they were 100 years ago. And that is because when the US first colonized, everybody was out with the axe and cleared the vast forests of the east coast for agriculture. Agriculture then shifted out to the Midwest. Then you had large-scale agriculture. You could produce things a lot cheaper. And that actually made agriculture on the East Coast not so viable. And those farms started to close down. All along those areas regenerated, and trees regenerated. And that regeneration of trees has cooled the East Coast. So it's 2 degrees cooler than it was 100 years ago. There's other parts of the states that are 2 degrees warmer because of the clearing. You look at where the Amazon's cleared and the difference between the cleared areas and the forested areas in temperature. In parts of Sumatra, for instance, we're talking 10 degrees Celsius differences. We regenerate these forests and we can bring them back. And that's where we can start talking about agroforestry systems, for instance, that will do it. And we can actively cool. So they're not just removing carbon dioxide, they're cooling. The best way to put it, every tree is transpiration is the equivalent of around 2 air conditioners. So the more trees we plant, the more we cool. But we can also do it with regenerating grasslands. Most of these grasslands, they get eaten bare. They're bare soil, and that absorbs all the heat. That heat forms these sort of heat bubbles and dries out and causes droughts. We keep the soil covered. It's a really important thing in regenerative agriculture. Keep the soil covered, and particularly with living plants. Not only are we taking out the carbon dioxide, we are cooling it, and we are fixing up what we call the transpiration cycle, the moisture. And the other thing is that the soil organic matter that comes from it, that's those carbon compounds that the plant roots, living roots excrete, they store moisture. So for every % increase, soil organic matter, it's around 20,000 gallons of water we can store. And the best example of that is the Rodale farming field systems trials in Pennsylvania. So these are actually 40-year-old trials, 40 years of continuous data, very good scientific data. And what they've shown is that the regenerative organic systems have 31% higher yields in drought years because of this extra water they capture. And what they've also shown is that these systems are the highest yielding over the long term. So what we're talking about here with our systems, we're higher yielding, we're more resilient for all the adverse weathers from climate change.
So what we're talking about here, I mean, it's not a lack of technology, it's not a lack of knowledge, it's a lack of understanding on the part of the people who can make a difference. I mean, I interview people all the time, people like you, people all across the United States, all across the world who are doing things on a small scale. But to scale that up requires, it's like, at this point, it's really an exercise in communication or a need for education and communication. What is your, I mean, you've written this book, so that's your contribution to this endeavor right now. But how do you see that actually happening? Because, I mean, in order to, if we're going to absorb the many gigatons of carbon necessary to actually pull all the emissions that we've put into the air since the Industrial Revolution, especially in the last 50 years, if we're going to pull that into the ground through regenerative systems, people need to understand that that's the way to do it. How do you see that? How do you see that happening? I mean, you say, oh, we should pay for ecosystem services, but that's to say that isn't enough. People have to, it has to filter up into the sort of echelons that are right now looking at, you know, mechanical carbon capture systems and, you know, or exploiting, you know, doing all this mining for solar panels that's destroying indigenous communities. That, I mean, you write about this in the book, you know, that are actually doing carbon capture. They are being decimated for mining for renewable energy. I mean, it's this crazy sort of Orwellian thing right now. What next?
Yeah, exactly. It is a crazy Orwellian thing, very much so. The last chapter, we've actually outlined how we want to scale it up. We've written the book to get this debate. And As you say, communication is really important. We actually have started, we've got the first trials going of the systems where we want to work with companies that have a good corporate culture, are socially responsible, who actually do care about the climate, and get them to redirect some of the funds at the moment they're spending on carbon credits or other things and put them towards our project to help us scale up. The money is there. So the critical thing for us is to be able to start finding some good corporations who will work with us. Basically, it's their chance to actually reverse this climate crisis and be active participants in it by funding our project to pay for ecosystem services of regenerating the whole planet, including the climate and the communities. We need to regenerate the ecosystems, the farming systems, and the communities. And by doing that, we will also regenerate the climate.
So there's a lot of calculations in your book about how much carbon can be sequestered per acre. We talked about that a little bit with the agave, but these are really big numbers. So Do you think regenerative agriculture alone can reverse the climate crisis, can reverse the emissions, can pull down more emissions than we are emitting at this point, and that we have emitted?
Yeah, the fact is I show it can be done. And what I'm giving here are best practices. And we need to just concentrate funding these best practices. And if we've got research improving these best practices, we can cool whole countries, whole continents, and the whole planet. The science is there. It's just changing the way we manage our agro-ecosystems.
So changing the way we manage our agro-ecosystems requires a change in policy. It also requires a change in mindset, sort of what you might call a paradigm shift. How do you see that?
For me, that's where it gets down to the economic payments. I'm a farmer. I've been farming for 50 years. I'm still an active farmer. I've still got calluses on my hand. Okay, I'll be out on the tractor later today. I farm, and I love farming. I also, over the last 50 years, worked with farmers on every continent, or every arable continent. We're not quite ready to farm at Antarctica. That might come if we fail. So,
oh God.
Anyway, but what I'm trying to say here is that end of the day, farming has to be economic. We need to give economic incentives, and that's where this paying people for doing the right thing.
I get the idea, but who pays?
There's lots of different ways of doing it. At the moment, I want to work with the corporations who are already paying for ESG, paying for carbon credits. They're already doing it. They're paying billions for carbon dioxide removal, for instance, building these big plants.
Not the right kind of plants.
Exactly. We already have the plants. Pay us the billions. We will put even more plants out. Our plants work, and it's good technology. It's technology that we know has worked for 500 million years.
Talk about your own farm.
I'm a tropical fruit farmer, regenerative, of course, but I'm also someone who's been involved in agroecology and organic agriculture for the last 50 years. I run this farm on those principles. I have a lot of biodiversity. At the moment, I have 30 acres of tropical fruit trees. They're fruits that most people probably in the States won't know. They'll know lychees or lychees, but I also have rambutan, mangosteen, durian, kamito. Plus, I have a biodiversity collection of more than 100 other species of tropical fruits, more than 100 species of bamboos. I grow water lilies and water plants. Also, I have another 20 acres where I raise cattle as well. I'm a great believer in all farming systems should have animals and plants. So there's 50 acres there. And then I've regenerated 100 acres of tropical rainforest here. And that's in really good condition now because we get all the keystone species. We have one of the large flightless birds called the cassowary, sort of known as the most dangerous bird in the world because its claws are like velociraptors. If you get kicked, you get ripped to bits. But they, for most of us, we find them quite friendly. So I have large pythons. We have the platypus. It's like a, best way to say it, a beaver with a duck bill. And it's a mammal that lays eggs, suckles its young. They're called monotremes. You have the other monotreme, which looks like a hedgehog. It's spiny, but eats ants. It lays eggs. And then we have lots of little rainforest kangaroos and possums, all other sorts of animals, lots of lizards. So what I like is that, in fact, in my lifetime, just got back this wonderful, incredible biodiversity.
Now, you regenerated the rainforest in part of your land. What was there before?
It was basically an open forest, and it used to be regularly burnt to graze cattle on it on the hillsides. Basically, a eucalyptus forest with grass underneath it. And by stopping burning, then the rainforest naturally regenerates. Fire is the enemy of rainforest. Rainforest plants can't tolerate fire, whereas in all continents too, we actually have landscapes that not only tolerate fire, but they actually traditionally needed fire.
Right.
The prairies are an example of that. They had fire, and then when fire was stopped, trees started to grow back. And the history of the prairies is very interesting in terms of everybody thinks that the Plains Indians followed the buffalo, but what happened there was the Plains Indians actually lit fires to regenerate the prairies, and that new green grass, what the buffalo went to, so the buffalo followed them, and they were managing. And that's a bit of history that needs to be rewritten. They were active managers of, if anyone's ever been on prairies, not a lot left, the old prairies, the most beautiful, incredible ecosystems. You walk in all the flowers, all the forbs. And that's the same also here in Australia, exactly the same it was. Our Aboriginal people actually did the same thing, made fires, opened up, and they ran kangaroos and emus the same way.
So is your farm an example of the kind of thing that you're promoting in terms of the economic aspect of regenerative agriculture? Are you making a profit? Have you become successful because of the kind of work you're doing?
Yeah, the answer is yes. In my case, to put 2/3 under rainforest is my own personal decision. I could have used it for cattle grazing and things like it was before, but I wanted to concentrate on the 30 acres, the best 30 acres rather than the steep areas. I thought it was better for the environment that the steep areas are forested so you don't get runoff and things like that. But the farm is profitable and it's highly productive. I get some of the highest yields in the district. I get the best quality, the best size. The market really likes my fruit because of the quality, so I get top price. I get top yield, and my production costs are a fraction of my colleagues because I'm not wasting money on toxic chemicals, pesticides and fertilizers. And by using regenerative agriculture to build soil health, using photosynthesis, those carbon compounds, feeding the soil microbiome is what builds soil and releases all the nutrients. In other words, my system is solar powered. I'm using the sunlight to provide all my ecosystem services and provide quality fruit.
What are your hopes for this book?
What I'm hoping is we change the conversation and we move away from the current one, which is it's just carbon dioxide. And if we scale up renewables large enough, that will stop the fossil fuel industry from putting more carbon dioxide greenhouse gases. And also if we get rid of cattle farming, we won't have methane. That's the push at the moment. And that push is a failure and it's doomed to fail. What we need to do is scale up using photosynthesis to remove carbon dioxide, to put that into the soil and store it in the soil, where we can use it for storing water, for building soil fertility, and at the same time having an agriculture that has green plants, that has all the transpiration, that actually physically cools. This is the other one. Under our current model, there's nothing to physically cool. They're still knocking down forests and smashing them down. Now, 80% of the tropical forests that get knocked down are being knocked down for industrial agriculture. We need to stop that. We need to start regenerating them, and that will cool the world by 2 degrees. The combination of removing the carbon dioxide and regenerating the ecosystems will reverse climate change. And that's what I want to use the word here. It's not net zero. We can reverse it, and we have the science and the evidence to do it.
André Leu, thank you so much for being with us on Down to Earth.
A pleasure. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to get this story out.
André Leu is author of the book, The Regenerative Agriculture Solution, a revolutionary approach to building soil, creating climate resilience, and supporting human and planetary health, published by Chelsea Green Press. And if you go to chelseagreen.com and use the code CGP35, you can get 35% off his book. You can also find out more about André Leu's work at regenerationinternational.org. You've been listening to Down to Earth. We would love it if you would support this program, which you can do by going to patreon.com/down-to-earth planet to plate, where you can sign up for as little as $3. Patreon is Patreon. And also please rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. The Quivira Coalition is a not-for-profit and a community network of ranchers, farmers, conservationists, scientists, educators, and many others dedicated to regenerative practices that produce healthy food, support meaningful livelihoods, sustain biodiversity, and remedy the impacts of climate change. To learn more about Quivira and how you can support their work, visit quiviracoalition.org, Quivira. And finally, this show is a production with the Radio Cafe. You can check out radiocafe.org to hear back episodes of this show and also find all kinds of other shows on a wide variety of topics as well. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.